Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. Pops.
Moms.
We might both still sound sick.
That flu.
Yeah, we're finally getting through the crud that I think almost everyone all over the country has had.
Yeah.
It's been...
But thank goodness for flu shot.
Yes.
It made my window of actually being sick very short.
Yeah. I think we've agreed that we're both in the less symptoms, still loopy phase.
Yeah.
I definitely feel a little floaty.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been interesting. I have loved doing the podcast since we started it, but I feel like this year, more than ever before, it has been so helpful in kind of like a bigger way for my life. You know, we had that episode about New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of a cleanup year, I cannot tell you how many times I start to stress over something. And I just tell myself, it's a whole year. It's a whole year of cleanup. It's going to take a while. It's going to be okay. This other thing that isn't resolved, so whole year. I got, 11 months. You know what I mean? It's been, that's been so helpful. And then the last episode with Katie talking about Camp Quest, we signed the kids up.
Oh, yes. This has been a couple of days of a lot of camp-related whatnot for me in researching and signing up and getting kid preferences, talking, because Reader just finished his big birthday Dave and Buster's sleepover party bash. And in the process, I was able to interview his guests about what camps they go to and, what they would recommend. And the camp that a lot of them go to doesn't work for us because it is it's a 4-week solid stretch and we're not going to be around for some of it.
Oh, got it.
So it isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's okay. Maybe next year, but still, it was just, it also feels good with me after last year being so programmed as much as possible. And the year before, even worse, that this year I am going out of my way. I'm planning around the need to be off, truly off with the kids for week-long stretches, for dad camp papa, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, before I was telling you this, before I would stress out at summertime because the kids would be off from school and I would need to work on managing them more. I would have less time to work and I would feel less productive, even though I wasn't being less productive in the grand scale, for my own personal goals. I felt like I was being less productive because I just didn't have as much time. So what I'm doing instead this year is I am working my schedule out writing wise so that I am going to truly conclude projects before the end of the school year such that over the summer, what I work on is going to be more planning for the next set of projects and then also implementing them in much more bite-sized chunks because it's not going to be necessarily script related in the same way. So it's going to be really an interesting summer, an experiment for me too in my work-life balance, in my management of my ego, the pressure I put on myself to perform. And it feels really good. Like there are some cool movies coming out this summer. We can go to see them, in the middle of the week. A lot of kids will be at camp. Mine won't necessarily be, thinking about going to different parks and stuff and museums and like date trips. And like, there's a lot of possibility that I am opening myself up to that I wouldn't have otherwise. Whereas, before I would have felt, oh man, what am I going to do this week? I have to squeeze in as much work as possible. So I'm not going to do a lot of stuff with the kids, which would then skew my perception of my time with them. And I would sometimes be sort of begrudging about it, which I don't like even talking about, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ashamed to admit it. And so this year is going to be different. I've completely reversed my sort of internal dynamic about it. I couldn't be more excited. It's going to be great. So yeah, we signed them up for Camp Quest. Super stoked about that. I really hope they get in to the survivalist week of camp, but I don't know if they will.
We're waitlisted.
Yeah. Next year, we're going to be more on it, but it's okay. This year we have a lot of cool family trips. We're going to the Wisconsin State Fair. Can't wait. We're going back east for the beach. Can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. It does feel like a puzzle every year, though. And then recalibrating to different places, because I'm trying, we didn't do camps in LA because our daycare had amazing summer. They just went through the summer.
They were also really young.
Yeah, but I know
it's not the same thing.
But I feel like I was thinking about it because I knew you had to start really, really early booking things. And then in Canada,
everything in LA.
Yeah. But then in Canada, you could be a little bit more relaxed because things didn't book up as fast.
Mm.
And then here I was like, February will probably be okay. But apparently not. Apparently not.
Everybody's really on it. So we got to be more on it next year.
Yeah. And it's hard because I feel like I did some great day camps as a kid, if I remember. But, particularly in Canada, I don't feel like we did some cool stuff. I don't know if we found anything that was amazing.
No.
We tried a lot of different things.
Yeah. But nothing that was truly spectacular.
No, nothing really hit. So
it's really sort of bland sport camp or theater camp or I don't know.
Yeah.
Not as cool. Here the camps are much better.
It seems that way, which is probably why they fill up so fast.
Yeah, exactly.
But we know we're figuring our stuff out. I still have high hopes for finding trying to find a cool art camp. Not camp. I actually don't want a cool art camp. I want a cool art class. Fingers crossed. Because I feel art camps, the art actually tends not to be as spectacular as if you can get into a really good class where it's more focused and anyways. But yeah, it is a time. And I'm so glad you're sort of in a good place with it, because we're not going to know for a little while how long Camp Dad is going to need to last.
Well, no, we have it all mapped out. And I know that they'll be doing some sort of camps some weeks during the summer. And we have some weeks that are already blocked out for Camp Dad.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. I really did not expect to be sending them away to a sleepaway camp this soon. And like Katie talked about, it's going to be hardest on me. I feel certain.
Oh, I already know it's going to be hardest on you. The moment that I brought my computer up, showing that I was about to click the process payment button,
yeah,
you were about to be in tears. It was quite charming.
But I mean, if you have not listened to that episode, go back and listen.
Katie's super cool.
The camp sounds super cool.
Yeah.
It's everything I want for them in the universe. she just posted that with like everything happening in the world right now, she's just pouring it all into making Camp Quest that much cooler. So I feel like,
yes.
Yeah. Just like time to be goofy and do weird stuff. Like, ugh.
Pick a different name for yourself.
Yeah, or wear wacky stuff. I don't know. So we're putting it together. Okay, so speaking of Katie, if you listen to the last episode, I think we mentioned that in addition to being a retired professor with a PhD in religion and being an amazing 23-year volunteer with Camp Quest, Katie also has 10 kids through marriage, adoption, and foster care. And before doing the episode with us, she recorded with the Queer Family podcast, talking about that whole experience. So I linked to it in the last episode. I will link to it again. You should definitely listen because it's a pretty amazing story. But I have really been wanting to talk about foster care, and I wanted to grab Katie for a few of her thoughts. And I think, I don't know if I can even explain why this has been a lifelong interest for me. When I was growing up, I had a friend who was adopted. And after adopting him, his family had a biological child. And while we never talked about it, I just always sensed the complexity of that situation for him. He was a very unique guy, neurospicy. I feel like his sister was not as neurospicy as him. And that whole dynamic of being an amazing kid, but an adopted kid with potentially some more complex issues than his biological sister, I just sensed what could be behind the scenes there. And I think it gave me kind of a lifelong interest in the complexity of building families. And then because I had this like gigantic ovarian cyst that I had to have removed in college, I knew even before we had fertility issues that I might have fertility issues. So the idea that we might not be able to have biological children was like, I mean, I've said it before, like I think the fertility journey was in some ways psychologically easier for us, just in that we weren't one of those families where like we thought it was, like we felt assured it was going to be easy for us to get pregnant. I think if you like come from a family where everybody gets pregnant really easily and like you think that's going to be your path, it can be even more devastating when it doesn't go that way.
Good point.
You know, because I remember, maybe you don't remember, but even before we got married, I was like, look, I had this thing happen. It may have no impact. Yeah. It may, I got to make sure you're okay with this. So it was always on my mind that we might have to think about building a family a different way. And obviously we didn't go that route, but I've followed people with families that have come together in mixed ways for a long, long time. And I think because I'm so interested in how that works, I also got pretty fascinated with foster care because that's an even more complex situation because you don't know how long the situation is going to last.
Yeah.
That's so stressful for families. So stressful for the kids. And so I don't know. I think I've just been interested in how we make that work. And then like before we started the podcast, I heard somebody talking about foster care and how it's important for secular families to get involved because one interesting thing about this whole system is that some religious groups, and my sense is it tends to be more conservative religious groups, really push fostering and adoption on their communities and or highly emphasize it, depending on where it comes from. It's a whole thing that really interests me. I have thought about fostering a lot. I think there are dynamics in our family that certainly now make no sense in the world, but I refuse to, I don't know. I want to do something to help somewhere in the system at some point. So it's like always been on my mind. And so, and then, so I follow a lot of people who talk about fostering, and it's gotten even more complex because with everything that Trump is doing with ICE raids and everything else, when you're deporting people, there can be a situation where their kids get left behind because their kids are citizens and they're not. And
so wild to think about doing that. Yeah.
And what the Trump administration has said is like, oh, that's okay because the foster care system can take care of those kids. And everybody I know, all the influencers I follow are like, no, it can't because it is spread thin.
Yeah, it can't take care of the kids it already has.
Yeah. And so I just think we're in a really interesting time where we have to think about it. We're like, there may be an even bigger need for foster parents. There are lots of parts of the system that could be done so much better. And I think it's like parenting is complex enough, but I think when you look at these situations that are even more challenging, it's like an even better chance to be more skeptical about what you're doing and how you're handling things. I mean, just like if you listen to these people who talk about fostering, like the amount of care that they put into thinking about how to make kids feel comfortable, it's amazing. Like, you know, when a new kid comes into your home, how to not be overwhelming, you know, how to like make it really calm the first night, like what kind of things to have, what to offer, like how to lay out, you know, kind of like how the house works without being
right. Plus, every kid is different. Every age is different. Every circumstance is different.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like with a cat where you just put him into, you know, a guest room for a couple of days and let the other cats get used to them. So you don't have like people like fighting right away. This is a sentient kid who oftentimes will fully remember everything that led up to this point.
Yeah.
I cannot fathom being a kid in the foster system, and my heart goes out to them. And I don't know what I would do as a kid in the system, but also like how I would cope as a parent. I think that would be a unique challenge that I'd be interested in undertaking, but that's not necessarily the right way to think about it because it's a person who needs love and support, not a challenge.
But I do think, but like all those things apply to your own kids as well, right?
Yeah.
Like when you have to be so
You know
careful.
what this sounds like? This sounds like Elon Musk justifying us moving to Mars, completely neglecting that all of that effort could be used to making Earth more habitable. The planet that we already have. And that's one of my issues with, like, I'm so torn about fostering because I know that we would be really good parents in general. I would hope we would be, at least.
I don't know. I mean, I think we'd be better than some, but like
but also like we've done so well by our kids because we've been able to put so much emphasis on our kids' experience that I wouldn't want to take that away from them. And I don't know how dividing my focus anymore would turn out. Like, I don't know what the results would be.
Yeah.
And it's hard because it is such a commitment and you have to commit to the situation without any data telling you what you could potentially expect as an outcome.
Yeah.
Like ADHD me has a hard time squaring that circle.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know, but like you can get approved and then you can offer respite care.
Okay.
So you don't take in your own kids, but when other foster parents need like a break or if they're traveling and the kids can't travel with them, you can take in a kid for like a night or two to help support another foster parent. So there are interesting options. I've been interested in looking at ways to support older foster youth that are aging out of the system. Speaking about learning all the time, one of the people that Katie is going to talk about actually just talked about how states are doing better with youth aging out, which I had no idea. So like you learn something new every day.
In what ways are they doing? What does doing better mean?
Providing continuing economic care and support. So like services. So some of the services that they get during foster care continue on.
Oh, like healthcare.
Yeah.
And like job opportunities.
I don't know about job opportunities, but I think
halfway housing or like.
Well, I think because like when you're in, like, look, we're going to talk about this more with people hopefully this year, but like foster parents get economic support.
Right.
To help take care of kids. So I don't know if that then transfers with like some economic support for the youth, but I think also healthcare, being allowed to stay with foster parents longer than 18. You know, like if you're getting counseling services, I think they've just done a better job, like not making it such a harsh cutoff where things taper off more slowly to help support kids.
Yeah, because that was the sense I always got was like you're releasing a felon, and it's like in the movies or whatever where they open the gates and then the person's sort of like standing out there with a bag of their stuff waiting for a ride out. You know, I as a parent, I find it very difficult to process the emotions around my kids going into the foster care system for whatever reason. Like, I know that we've gone out of our way to set up a sort of a chain of custody for them with guardianship, which is great. Not everybody can do that, but and so I'm always stuck thinking, oh man, what would I do? Like looking down from the heavens, as it were. Like if I saw my kids in that, like it's just so hard as a parent to see kids in distress like that. And to know that the system that's basically their fail safe kind of stinks.
Yeah. Though amazing foster parents in it. But like,
of course. But like, again, even with us, like I would consider us to be good parents, and other people say that we are, so I'll take their word for it. But even with us, I would not assume that we would be good foster parents.
Yeah. It's like,
it is a different skill.
Yeah.
And it requires a certain set of circumstances. And I am not convinced that I would be as good a foster parent as I am a parent to my biological kids.
No, it's super complex.
I would hope that I can, but I can't guarantee that. And I would want to be able to.
For sure.
Yeah. It's so hard. It's hard just for me to even think about. It's hard for me to talk about.
So anyways, here are some initial thoughts from Katie. It's something I clearly want to talk more about. And it's something I hope we can talk with some other folks about throughout the year. So Katie, leading up to this interview, I listened to another interview you did with the Queer Family podcast, which was amazing. And in it, you go into all of the details of your family and your fostering journey. And we will link to it in the show notes because it is an amazing story. And I'm so glad I listened to it. But I wanted to grab a couple minutes of your time because I have been wanting to talk about secular fostering since the podcast began and have kind of been trying to figure out the right people to have on. And it's something that like I want to make happen this year. So the first thing I wanted to ask, and I felt even uncomfortable writing you about it, but like years ago, I heard somebody talk about fostering and they talked about like a need for secular foster parents because there is a big push in some religious communities to foster, which can be amazing. But in some of those communities, like that can mean that you have some foster parents that might not be as open to queer kids, as supportive of kids of other religions or secular kids. And as somebody, there are lots of reasons why I don't know if we'll ever foster, but I've always been interested in fostering. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like it's something I want to potentially do. And if there's a need for it, that's amazing. But I sort of feel like when you really want something to be true, sometimes you cannot be critical about thinking about it. So
it's true.
So I'm curious, like somebody who's been in fostering for a long time, do you think there is a need for secular foster parents?
Yes, absolutely. It is 100% the majority of people that I have encountered in foster care are coming from a religious perspective. And I would say that I've seen, like it would definitely have made connections with other secular foster families, but it is a minority. And there are some systemic problems that you see as a result of that religious perspective. Not necessarily, I mean, it absolutely does reflect itself in gender and sexuality and how accepting you might be of a kid's desire to maybe not go to church or whatever it is. But I actually think there's a more troubling theme amongst some of these religious communities, which is like the way that they approach fostering as an act of like ministry and also as something they feel like is being done to, even if they're not like recognizing it, about their own self-improvement, right? Like their own agenda to prove their worthiness and how good they are. And it becomes not about the kids and instead about the like demonstration of God's love or however that is framed. And so I think that what it tends to do is sort of gloss over the experience, the very complicated experience of children in care, and instead make it about we can solve these children's problems by providing them with the kind of family that they need. And that so misses the point and so misses what kids actually need, which is for it to be completely about them and not about what you think they need, but instead about you figuring out what it is that they want. And centering them in their biological family, regardless of how troubling and problematic that is, because that is their reality. And so I just think that it can tend to get caught up in these narratives that are very like, you're a saint. I mean, I've been called a saint countless times, which is, misses the mark so strongly on so many different levels. And so there's this like valorizing of families that are doing this work. And I think it tends to end up being about them and their goodness in its worst expressions, which I actually think are fairly common, and not about the kids. And I think that's what I think is most troubling. Most of the time, those folks are going to have good boundaries and say, I'm not going to take a queer kid. And so that's good. I think the system's better at identifying that people absolutely need to be directly asked and they need to be asked specific questions to know if they're going to be supportive. But kids also still end up in families like that think they can handle and cannot. So it's a big issue. And I think an issue in general of how people come at fostering.
No, I mean, because we had a whole discussion on one of our episodes about how we don't feel like our kids owe us anything.
Right.
And I think that has to be 100% true for a foster child in your care as well. But I can see that those feelings might be even more complex.
Right. Especially when you're surrounded by a community that is focused on like the importance of the act of fostering as an extension of your religious expression. Like I just think it carries a lot of high stakes, and then it makes it hard for people to show that they're struggling, right? And so then people struggle behind closed doors and have this, like, there just gets to be this sense of I'm supposed to be this good person who can handle it all, and I'm not handling it, or it's not going the way I want. And it becomes very hard. And the people who lose on that the most are the kids.
And then, for somebody who's been doing it for such a long time, as we think about covering it in more depth, what do you think we should be thinking about? Like, is there stuff that most coverage misses? Are there topics that aren't talked about that should be?
Yes. So one big thing that people tend to not realize about foster care is how much it's focused on reunifying kids with their biological family, even in the most extremist circumstances, for a timeline that is often going to feel to foster parents who are often wanting to see a resolution for these kids faster than the system's going to achieve. And so that's one piece of it, is that how centered it is on reunification. And the other piece is how frustrating that can feel, because the standards for reunification are often not what we might think they should be, right? It is a legal standard of whether or not you can provide a basic level of care, and not necessarily like the full and robust ideas that we might have about what that child needs. And that can be incredibly difficult. So I think we tend to focus in foster care about like how do I make sure that I like can do enough things for the kids, or I'm prepared for, the kids' material needs, or how do I set boundaries so that I don't take a group of kid or like a type of kid that is going to create a problem in my home, right? There's a lot of anxiety about maybe not teenagers or maybe not these certain kinds of behaviors. And at the end of the day, you can't control any of that, right? Like generally speaking, CPS knows almost nothing about what these kids are doing, even if they've been in a foster home prior. And that's such an evolving thing with trauma too. I think instead people really need to focus on their own emotional preparation to be able to deal with what are going to be inevitably the most difficult circumstances that you're ever going to encounter, and the secondhand trauma of learning about the experiences of a child and like what brought them into care. I think another mistake people make is thinking that young children won't have that. And that's just 100% not true. Even babies will have that. And then they will grow up to continue to have that, because the trauma of separation from your mother at birth is an enormous thing that we can scientifically demonstrate is a case. And people do not understand that that's not something you can just love out of a child. That is a permanent harm to them. And then what comes out of that with adoption as well. I think if you want to be a foster parent, you need to listen and follow accounts of kids who are telling you about what it was like for them as a foster child and what adoption felt like to them. Because we tend to think of adoption as a universal good and as the wonderful, joyful outcome of a process. And it is often another trauma for kids. And so it's really, really, really complicated. And I think we're like only starting now to see people who have been in the system expressing the level at which those things have been true for them, and how difficult it is to be told your whole life what a miracle it is that you were fostered and adopted when that's not how you feel at all.
Yeah. Is there anybody you follow who you think is like a good person to be paying attention to?
Yes. So one person I follow for like foster parent advice, and she's really good about giving like what a new foster parent would do versus what an experienced foster parent would do, is her account is called Laura Foster Parent Partner. So she's all over YouTube. She has hundreds of videos and is incredible. Her advice is, I just find it to be always spot on. And then there is another adoptee who I think is he's very, very passionate, and he says a lot of things that people tend to find to be really upsetting. His name is Carlos Dillard.
His book is on my nightstand. It's the next thing I'm reading.
He is incredible. And the things he says elicit massive reactions in people and who have fostered and adopted, and even amongst other people who have been in foster care or been adopted. But his experiences, like I think being able to cope with that and get your head around what it is that he's sharing about why he thinks some of these systematic things in the like adoption foster care worlds are so problematic. I think it's really important to be able to grapple with something that's like that in your face and that opposite to what people typically think. So that's a good book to have, and I'm glad that you've got him on lockdown already.
Amazing. And then I guess if there's anybody, it's like such a huge question, but you talked about sort of parents thinking about their own readiness for things. If there is somebody thinking about moving towards fostering beyond the things you've already said, is there something you think they should think about that maybe people aren't, or something they're worrying about that like maybe isn't the real thing to be worried about?
Yeah. So I think one thing to be worried about is that people don't understand how much work it is to engage with the system. So not just emotional labor, and that's huge. And you have to be prepared for that. And you also have to have an action plan for when you're not prepared and you like melt down over and over, because no matter how prepared you think you are, you just won't be. I've never heard a foster parent say, yes, it was cool and easy, and the whole time I was emotionally regulated. But it's just a lot of work, right? The kids have tons of appointments, and caseworkers are going to have very limited timeframes where they can meet you. And so if you're expecting to have both people working full time, that is probably going to be a very unrealistic expectation. So being able to like have that kind of flexibility, or a job that really allows for an enormous amount of flexibility and emergency situations, that is something I think that people also don't necessarily factor in. And we have a tendency to think like a more rosy picture than what it is likely to be. And so I think people have to really have an action plan for the amount of like time and labor that ends up being involved in caring for children. And then respite is the other piece. You'll hear that's something that they've really gotten into the system and they've acknowledged and recognized. They won't even let you become a foster parent unless you've identified people who will help you. However, a lot of people think they can help it, and it's just a lot. It's a lot. And so you have to really have like layers and layers of support. And also to recognize that a lot of people leave the system really quickly. There's like, I could look up the statistics, but they pretty much say there's like 3 sort of versions of being a foster parent. Like you either, sort of engage briefly and just like sort of blow up and exit, or you stay really longitudinally and are able to like manage the stress of the system, because it's very, very slow and things never are the way that you hope that they would be. It's a lot of disappointment and a lot of wanting to know and have certainty, and you just aren't going to get that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
And we'd love to talk to you about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about it. I have a lot of strong feelings that have evolved from my own experiences, and a lot of what happened in my journey, as you heard, like it was not expected. I didn't think, I'm going to just have 10 kids. Like that's an unreasonable number of children to have. And it was never my intention, but things just happened. And when you put yourself into the foster care system, that is part of what you're signing up for, is like a complete lack of control over your life to some degree. So, yeah.
So it was recently Valentine's Day. I mean, from when we record, it's going to be Valentine's Day soon. From when you're hearing this, it will have recently been Valentine's Day. And you completely broke the rules because apparently you got me a gift, even though we don't usually do anything for Valentine's Day. Still feeling a little peeved about that. But I thought, given that it was, I've sort of been thinking about relationships a bit. Because, there's been so much about like trad wives and toxic masculinity and all this stuff. And I feel like one of the biggest impacts we have on our kids is kind of like mirroring what relationships can look like. So here's what got me thinking about it. So I feel like in kind of more liberal circles and the sort of people that I follow, not because I'm like interested in the trad wife universe, but who I follow because they're people that I like. People are looking to have equal relationships. They're looking to split work equally. They're looking to have communicative marriages. They hopefully care about how each other are doing. They're like, right? Like these are kind of the goals that people have. But I am starting to wonder, because I was like, there was a month there where I was listening to all these podcasts and people were talking about things. And I was just like, what is happening in people's relationships? I just don't know. So I have like 2 unrelated things. I don't know. They just got me thinking. So one,
this is sounding very vague so far.
Yeah,
lots of talk about things and you don't know.
Okay. So I was listening to the Burnt Toast podcast, and that is a podcast about pushing back against diet culture and thinking about food and body size in a more healthy way. And they go a little bit broader than that. It's a very cool podcast. The host recently got divorced, so that's sort of been a topic. And she had on a friend who had also been recently divorced, and they were talking about the nice things that they found after they were single with kids. And these are both people where it's like their husbands are still very involved, like they were active parents, they're still sharing parenting. Like these were very liberal people working with all of those ideals I talked about, right? And one of the things both women talked about was how nice it was not to have to feel like they had a prepared dinner ready where they could eat what they wanted. And I was like, okay. Like, what was the expectation before you got divorced? And then one of them was talking and she's like, yeah, because if we had like chicken and broccoli and a potato, that wasn't really a real meal because I didn't use a recipe.
Okay, there's so much wrong with this.
So, like, one, by that metric, no steakhouse in America is serving real meals. Right?
Or anywhere.
Because you're getting a wedge salad and a piece of meat, which is like lovely if that's what you want for dinner. But to me, that is a very prepared standard dinner.
Yeah.
And like,
I want chicken and broccoli and a potato.
Yeah. So just to like set standards. So, and I told my best friend this and she truly looked at me like, oh my God, you're disgusting. But it's fine. Everybody does what works for them. 3 nights a week, our dinner is heated up beans, not prepared with anything, just beans. And then everybody gets to dump whatever they want on top of it. So cheese, barbecue sauce, I put raw onions on everything, like whatever makes you happy. 3 nights a week. And we have veggies. But why is this the woman's concern? And like, why? Anyway, so that was the first thing where I'm just like, what is happening what is happening? And then Dan Savage, who does the Savage Love podcast, which I think I've talked about before. I've been following him since I was a teenager. He's been doing sex advice for forever. He has like created the space, has come up with so many amazing ideas. There's a lot I disagree with him about, but like has come up with just these like amazing concepts that are great, like the campsite rule and like so much good advice.
Santorum.
And yes, and Rick Santorum, terrible. He ran a contest to pick like the most disgusting thing that we could call Santorum. And I think, what is it that they came up with? Like
I mean, can we really talk about it on this podcast?
All right. It might be pushing the boundaries. Anyways, it was brilliant. So
people can Google.
But he just had an episode of the podcast and he was talking about something and he was like, oh yeah, those things in your relationship where like, it's a thing you can't talk about, except maybe if you like go on a weekend and like drop acid or take ecstasy and like admit everything. But just those things you can like never say to your partner. And again, I was just like,
what? So what it sounds like is that they were just in like very unfulfilled, non-communicative relationships and they were happy to be out.
Yeah.
It sounds really simple.
Well, maybe, but like, so one, I don't want to make it sound like we're so amazing because there was like definitely a period where you were depressed.
Yeah.
And we hadn't dealt with stuff.
Nope.
And there were a couple of issues and you were like, we cannot talk about these things. It wasn't if we talk about them, our relationship will fail, but you were just like very clear. You were like, I will not talk about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard. So it's not like—
I can imagine. And I'm sorry again.
You did so much work. You're amazing. So it's not like we've never faced those issues. I guess what I want to ask is, what do you think is happening for people who like definitely have the ideal of having a communicative, equal relationship to like get to the place where like such weird rules are being set up that they're like clearly not working for people in the relationship?
Like what advice would I give them to do what?
No. I'm like wondering, like, because like, look, there's the whole trad wife thing where women are being told like your job is to do whatever to submit to your husband. His opinion is the most important thing. Your job is to support him. Your job is to take care of the family. Like, I understand the unhealthy dynamic there, right? That's a terrible message. It's not setting up healthy relationships. Like, look, it's fine if you want to stay home and it's fine if you're happy.
It shouldn't be prescriptive.
Doing those sort of things, but
it should be something that they approach mutually and that is entered into voluntarily.
Yeah.
Not like a social prescription.
No, and you can be...
Because it doesn't work for everybody.
Of course not. And like, if you don't want to be doing that, you shouldn't feel any pressure to do it.
Correct.
And even if you are a stay-at-home parent, that doesn't mean that you have to submit to all the opinions of the other person, right?
Correct.
So like, it is...
What it does is if anything, it's such a weird double standard. The thing that I will never understand about trad is the value that you place upon a person, in this case, of course, the wife, raising the children. Like that is such an important thing that you need the dedicated mother caregiver to do that. But then the person doing this job that your culture praises so highly then is not afforded the same courtesy necessarily that you might offer your fellow man. It's wild to me. It's like, yes, you're the queen. It revolves, like, you do the thing that's most important. Like in the Bible, you're raising the family and the yada, yada, yada. But don't say that outside of the house. And also make sure you wear this and also make sure you do that. Like,
in my opinion, even though you're
strange.
the one running the house, my opinion about what happens in the house and the children is more important than yours. Like, I get it. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
But if you're not coming from that kind of weird, skewed value system, I'm just like wondering, like, what in culture is then setting up rules where people who aren't professing those values are finding themselves in these like weird prescriptive situations.
Well, I think the whole trad thing is just a more extreme example of something that pervades culture. Like, you know, there are ways of having that sort of expectation that don't involve hyper-religiosity or this sort of dogmatic approach. So maybe it's just a matter of degrees, but it's kind of always there for a lot of folks.
Is it like a class cultural assumption that if you're not like doing things in a certain way, it's not, then you're sort of like not succeeding for your children or like presenting the way a family should look?
Maybe. And I think there's also probably or likely an overlap with anti-queer sentiment. That, you know, this sort of rigid sense of this is how things should be, and any sort of variation or gradation in expression is bad.
Interesting.
Like, I think it goes deeper than that. It's like talking about authoritarianism versus talking about versus talking about Republican. Because I don't necessarily think that even though the GOP has sort of bent the knee to authoritarianism, not all Republicans necessarily have, and they will vote for Republican politicians because of certain value judgments or certain issues. But that overarching, need to submit to the leader sort of thing, I think is like a deeper issue on the political side. In the same way, I think that this need to submit to a very strict sense of role and purpose within a family and a strict expression of those roles and vis-a-vis gender let me just say, it's something that I am now going to be thinking a lot about. I know a lot of people have been thinking about this for many years, but I also might be, and probably am, very privileged in that I am cis and het, and I'm white, and I've never had to sort of question how I would fit in to society. So even though I don't care how people build their families so long as the outcome is in favor of the children being happy and healthy and free to express themselves and chart their own courses. But yeah, it really is a place where, I don't know, I might find divergence with even some folks that I know who are more left-leaning, just because, like anything else, you can agree on certain issues but disagree on others. And this one, especially if we're talking about fostering and inviting other kids into your house, like, what culture were they raised in?
Mm-hmm.
What are their expectations? Will the way that we raise our kids make them feel a certain way that would be counterproductive to our goal of them being integrated into our family, integrated and productive in our community, happy on their own? Like, would we actually be a cultural fit, even though we have all the enthusiasm potentially to welcome somebody else's child into our life?
Yeah, it's very related. I mean, even because I can say all of that, but also I'm like, if we're inviting friends over for dinner, like, obviously, if we were having a dinner party, we're not just giving people beans, because, like, you always step it up when you invite people over. But, like, if their friends were just staying or something, like, I would make sure that we weren't doing beans. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So, like, but it's just food. So, like, maybe I have my own, like, hangups about it. It's so interesting. And I want, like, now that I'm saying it, I wonder if for some women who have, like, really worked to excel outside of the home, if there's, like, to prove, like, maybe it's like it's still like such a modern thing that women are working.
Right.
Like, this is just like a couple generations that it's been the norm. Like, maybe there is, like, to prove that it's like, okay, I'm doing all of that. Like, if I can do all of the standard stuff at home and make it look beautiful and perfect, it, like, proves that it's okay. Like, I've justified, like, look, I can do all of this and it doesn't make anything different in this other part of my life. And therefore, I've, like, shown that you can be everything. But then the fucked up part is, like, if their husband was insisting on that, or maybe that's, like, trying to live up, like, trying to fit another person's family without having the discussion of, like, what the blended family you want to create together is.
Sure.
You know? So, like, if that was the expectation in their family, having a hard time pushing back and being like, but we could do something that's just us, you know? But I guess it feels like a time when these, like, ideas about masculinity and femininity are, like, really having an impact on the world and politics and, like, what kind of decisions people are making.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe even more than in other times, like, what images of that we're presenting in our homes actually have a more profound impact for how kids are going to go out into the world and, like, think about these things. You know what it comes down to?
What does it come down to?
Nurse Jackie.
How so?
So Nurse Jackie was a TV show that went deeply off the rails.
I know what you're going to be talking about.
But when it started, it was really good. And what is that actress's name?
The actress?
Yeah. Who plays Nurse Jackie?
Oh, Edie Falco.
Edie Falco, who was the wife on The Sopranos, who's a great actress. She plays a nurse. She's a drug problem. There's another young nurse that she's friends with. Zoe in the ER where she works. And
played by Merritt Weaver.
Yes, who's lovely. And Zoe's had an issue when she stays with Nurse Jackie for a little while. And Jackie says...
This is night. This is at the end of their shift.
Yeah. And they're trying... like, they have to eat something. And Jackie's like, should I make pancakes? And Zoe's character says, you can have pancakes for dinner? I didn't even know you could do that. Or is that it? Did I get it right?
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yes, I didn't know that was a thing. And I feel like, and we, like, quote that to each other all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, what sort of things are happening in our families where we need to be like, oh my gosh, you can do that? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I think that this is where social media actually does a lot of good, is that being able to network with other parents and to learn that the way that you're doing things isn't necessarily the only way that you can do things or should do things.
Yeah.
And it just gives your own kids potentially a lot of benefit from that opportunity to have variety of experience, or perhaps just a better way to do something really mundane. Like have dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You have to get to
I really do.
Reader's basketball game. So
I really do.
We'll wrap it up there. We need to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
What are you doing?
I'm flicking the microphone.
Okay, it's great. Where did I put my notes? I put them somewhere.
River.
I know I put them in here. I'll just pretend if I can't find them.